to try to make this person, by solving their problems, by helping, to try and make this person express or be or do anything other than what is true for them in that moment, in the capacity of holding space and having someone else hold space for you, is selfish. You're doing that. You're not trying to help them in that moment. You're trying to change this situation so you don't have to feel that heavy, dark feeling, or so you don't have to feel uncomfortable. And I think it's important to name that, because yes, there's nuances here. Yes, sometimes you want to help. Yes, sometimes there might be a sprinkle of good intention in there. But a lot of the time, that comes down to you don't want to feel the uncomfortable feeling that's being invoked in you by witnessing somebody else's level of pain or suffering. And that is a selfish thing to do. And then on top of that, you double down, like you said, by disempowering them. Welcome to the first episode of the Sacred Seat podcast. My name is Melanie, and today Alana and I are sitting down to discuss holding space. This episode is all about the ways we can become better space holders, what it means to hold space, the different ways it can look to hold space in our lives, as well as naming and calling forward a few of the sticky traps that we can find ourselves in when we're on our space holding journey. Together, Alana and I created Alchemia. Alchemia's mission is to facilitate self-discovery, spiritual expansion, and cultivate conscious community. To help Alchemia do this, we have created the Sacred Seat podcast. This is an opportunity for Alana and I to connect deep, share our intimate thoughts, our perspectives, our stories, and our journeys, bring on different guests, and explore a wide array of topics. Everything that could possibly fall under the category of self-discovery, spiritual expansion, plant medicine, herbalism, living in tune with nature, astrology, the gene keys. We are really going to do our best to dive deep and get into the nitty-gritty nuance that exists in this space. With introductions and backstory out of the way, Alana and I are so excited to be able to finally share Alchemia and the Sacred Seat podcast with the world at large. Let's dive right into our first episode, all about holding space. Start our debut into the YouTube space or the podcast space, talking about one of the most fundamental things to us within Alchemia, for me personally and for Alana as well, is holding space. It is a massive topic, but I'm so excited to be sinking into it with you here on our first podcast. How are you feeling about podcasting?
I am a little nervous, but mostly excited. This is just a new experience for me. I haven't done a ton of these, and it's different, I think, with us being in different locations. I'm in Mexico. You're in BC, Canada, and I think it's pretty amazing.
It's pouring
that we can do
rain
this,
here. I know.
Sunshine.
Internet. Yeah, it's pouring rain here, and you're in like a tropical oasis. Like the polarity or the juxtaposition is not lost on my cold self.
Sending you sun.
Yeah, no doubt. Why did we want to talk about holding space for Alchemia as our first podcast? I think the most obvious thing is because it's a pillar of what we do. Alchemia is a retreat business, and getting into this topic and sharing our experience of holding space also holds space for us to teach people who might want to be showing up with us and journeying with us while we hold space for them. And it's also something that we hear about within the spiritual community a lot, and it is not always clear what an individual or a business or a social media post is talking about when they say holding space. It is a massive, broad category. So before we sink too deeply into the discussion and cover some of the nuance and some of the ridiculous personal stories that I am sure will come up throughout this podcast, because holding space can be a diverse experience, I want to talk about basics, definitions, different ways that holding space can look, so that we can start off with a really kind of clear foundation on the same page. And for me, I would love to hear what you think as well. For me, holding space is essentially allowing room and holding a safe container of structure and integrity and compassion for a person or persons, or for yourself, to emotionally go through, process, and experience whatever they are working through in a judgment-free, held way.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that pretty much sums it up. That like that safety piece I think is really key. There's like a level of trust there as well too. But yeah, it's a beautiful container that allows us to get in touch and shift and go through whatever we're going through. And yeah, I feel like there's so many different ways that holding space can show up. I think the most obvious way we see is like in a therapeutic setting. So like, you know, you're going to therapy and you're literally paying somebody to hold space for you. To hear about your problems, to objectively listen and let you process things in real time. Yeah. And then there's obviously like sacred settings as well, which is what we do here at Alchemia. So in ceremonies, holding space, in that sacred capacity to shift things within yourself, within your being, whether it's with plant medicine or just with breath work or whatever. I think we see it in more obvious ways too, right? Like relationships.
Mm-hmm. It's like those are the big hitters. You've got like the therapeutic capacity where a therapist, for example, or a lot of the conversation online around holding space is usually, like you said, spiritually inclined. It can be super mundane also, like holding space for your friend who's had a rough day. That's a way I think people don't realize that they are actively holding space when they take their time to center themselves in some way, maybe taking a few deep breaths and like really being present for your friend or your family members. I think one of the really interesting points is like we often have to hold space for ourselves, especially the further we get down a spiritual path or journey. We end up utilizing the skills that we cultivated within a therapeutic capacity or in a spiritual place of space holding, and then applying them to holding space for ourselves or our own parts or whatever emotions might come up in our crazy human experience. Holding space is such a diverse thing that can show up in so many different ways in our life. I would love to hear from you about the moment you kind of saw or felt, might be more accurate, felt the value of having someone hold strong space for you, or having been in a situation where you could be the one holding space for someone else. Why is space holding important? And at what point did it really hit home for you that, oh, this is valuable?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I would say like initially, I think we just kind of relate to people throughout our lives, not really knowing like really what we're doing, not really being conscious of how we're showing up in our relationships and our friendships. But I think I like the first kind of intro to holding space for me would be like just that really good friend, you know, the one that like you just feel safe going to at any point and telling them anything, you know, you don't feel judged, you don't feel any of that. And it's like in that space, there's just so much healing that happens, and it really like deepens that connection in your relationships. And it makes you also like want to show up that way for them. So you kind of like get to model that. So I'd say that's kind of like the first little kind of inkling that I had. But, you know, we all have our traumas and our, even not the best word, our wounds from childhood. We have the things that like kind of make us so we don't necessarily show up authentically as ourselves because of fear of being judged or being seen fully. And so I feel like for me, where I had like the deepest experience with holding space would be with plant medicine. And so my first main plant teacher was grandmother medicine. For those who don't know, that's ayahuasca. And I worked with Aya for quite a while, and it's an interesting experience because they are completely boundaryless. So like you can't hide anything from these medicines once you've taken them. They're in your body, they're in your being. They're not, you can't be like, oh, I'm not going to show you this part of me. It knows. It's a very different experience than like the masks that we wear and when we're presenting ourselves to people in life, really, right? And so having that like that defense mechanism ripped away from me was the first kind of step of being like, okay, I'm being seen and held exactly as I am in this deep, vulnerable place. And I actually ended up having some really deep repressed memories from childhood come up that had been really shaping my existence, like really shaping the way that I've been showing up. And I've been really frustrated and, even had some suicidal ideation at the time of just like, what is the point of life? And so once I was able to kind of uncover this, like and it took me like, how many ceremonies? Probably was like my 8th ceremony before it like kind of I felt safe enough for this to come up. But that like space holding, and like I will say the facilitator, the maestro of ceremony, I have had at this point, I also had deep trust and connection with her as well. But like with the medicine itself as well, my relationship with the medicine had really deepened. I felt safe enough to actually tap into this part of myself that I hadn't before. And from there, I've been able to excavate and do a lot of even deeper healing and have a lot more understanding about myself, and be able to kind of like rewire and make different changes. So I would say like that's where like I got lit up about holding space and the power it really has. But yeah, it's not something I think that you really consciously consider unless you're, doing this kind of work.
Totally. Yeah, I think when we're younger, I love the point that you brought up. Like, I think holding space can often get categorized as being a good friend, right? When I know, like, obviously I'm a girl. So when I was a little girl and we were having slumber parties and sleepovers, you wanted to be a good friend and be there when your friend was upset, right? And that desire at that age, I think, is really speaking to holding space capacities, like the skills that we need to hold space, listening, active listening skills. I feel like that has been all over the internet for years, like nodding, eye contact, open body language, really showing up and being present, especially, I mean, I can double down on the importance of that in this day and age. Like, we all know how not seen and not held we feel when someone's on their cell phone or something, and we're trying to have a deep connection with them.
So true.
And I love, right? And I love that it's such a layered thing, because it's such an integral part of humanity, because humanity's I believe, a main purpose to humanity is connection and relationship, and holding space is a pillar of that. Especially in that deep ceremonial capacity. You did a great job sharing like the more everyday mundane, but which is being a good friend, listening to people in your life, showing up for those hard conversations, practicing the very mundane skills of learning how to be a good listener. But you can also do this through like trial by fire in like sacred ceremony, like you said, where you were excavating and cultivating some of that deep stuff. And to me, I hear in that like holding space well and for someone, or having space held for you well, is such a trust moment. There is so much trust that has to show up, which innately is terrifying. We, as people, do not necessarily trust easy, especially, like you said, when we bring in those wounds or times where someone hasn't held space for us properly or well, or hasn't received our fullness, or our fullness wasn't allowed in the space or at the table, or we didn't get to be present and embodied. And I think all of that can get tied into holding space. So listening to you talk, I'm like sinking deeper into the reality that this is like 20 podcast worth of conversations, really.
Yeah, it's a big topic. And again, it's just like, I think, people just kind of like don't even really consider it. It's just like people who aren't in the spiritual community, or even maybe some who are, just kind of a glaze over look when you talk about it, just kind of like, oh, okay, like holding space. Yeah. What does that even mean? And, but there's so much depth to it, and so much like juiciness when you really get into it.
Well, and I think too, it's almost one of those things that people throw around like so nonchalant that people might be embarrassed to be like, what do you mean by that? Because it's used so often, and like everyone assumes that they know what that person means when they say holding space. And it's not just common knowledge. Like, this is something I see in the spiritual community, or the therapeutic community, or the self-help community, however you want to cut it. A lot is like, no one wants to really ask the question that would make it look like you're not enlightened or not aware or less experienced, which is, I mean, it's a role I'll play all the time. I'll ask the silly question. I have no issue with that. And I think, that's why it's an important conversation to have, because it means something so different to everybody. And it looks so different to everybody. Like, we can still be talking about 20 different things. Like we said, there's therapeutic, there's ceremonial, there's in your everyday life. Layers, baby. It's complicated.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Not just, yeah, like like you said, the relationship with ourselves, but like also the relationship to like the collective even is like, I don't know. I feel like that's where some of my deepest holding space has had to be lately, especially is just like with what is going on in the world is like, how do we hold space for that? Right. And seeing it play out on like the real stage and like social media with all of the things coming up with Israel and Palestine and, and just, the health stuff. There's just so many events that are like kind of worldly events going on where people are very polarizing, and to find your center and hold space for yourself and the world and the collective as it's being processed is like, that's a huge feat in itself as well.
Oh, for sure. Well, and we've had this conversation a lot because obviously we both live in this world, and then our boundaries or our wants and wishes get bumped up against that of societies and that of other people within society. But I think something that I love that you do, and I really appreciate in our friendship and the way we hold space for each other, and then breathe into Alchemia, our retreat business, and the aspects that we bring from our personal experience into that, for me, would be the focus of non-judgment per se, or navigating that kind of polarity, which becomes a pivotal thing in space holding, especially for maybe random people at the grocery store. It's like that old timely or timey truth of like, you haven't walked 1,000 miles in that other person's shoes. So to hold the space for the fact that that person might be going through it, is going through it, having their own stuff, I count that as holding space. And that has been like a lifesaver in navigating the last 4 years in the collective zeitgeist of chaos that we've been going through. Like, so many people have all these crazy shifts that happen. Even just the last eclipse season here in October, we just made it out of, having to hold space for the fact that people are going through tumultuous, life-altering changes and might be dicks in the grocery store. Like, I love this topic, and I think I'll probably end up tangenting like this a lot, but I love this topic because it's something so simple that you could apply to the random stranger in the grocery store. And that almost implies like it's not important. But in reality, for me, it's one of those magical in the mundane moments, because there are layers of qualities, of traits, of skills that have been practiced and honed, and they should not be assumed that everyone has them. And I think teaching people through Alchemia or in our everyday lives or modeling them is really the way to bring the conversation of holding space, having good ceremony, having good integrity in these relationships, and really showing up and being brave to hold space or have people hold space for us. That all ties into the willingness to ask questions we don't know the answers to and risk looking silly. It ties into understanding the nuance of holding space and the fact that these skills that are going to be required need to be taught. And if you didn't get taught, then you can't shame yourself for not knowing them, and viewing it as like an exciting challenge to rise to, for me. So with all of the different ways we find ourselves in the position to hold space, whether for our loved ones, our clients, ourselves, random people in the grocery store, what are some of the tools? What are some of the capacities, some of the traits, some of the characteristics that you try to embody in those moments? What makes a person better able to hold space for themselves and other people? What should we be embodying, or what could we try to cultivate in ourselves?
I think the first thing, like, that popped into my head is exactly what you just said about like being on the phone. It's like, if you want to hold effective space, you need to make sure you're giving people like your full attention, that you're actually like listening, there's this like innate need, I think, in every single one of us, especially like our inner children's, like they want to be acknowledged, they want to be seen, and they want to be valuable and valued. And so for you to like be holding space for someone, I think that's the first kind of key ingredient that I would say is like that you're actually listening. You don't have your phone, you're maybe not thinking about what you're going to say next, or you're not thinking about what you're going to eat for dinner, like, so there's so many things. And don't get me wrong, that's not always easy, like it's sometimes you can be so caught up in your mind and be like, oh, like I gotta go do this thing, this popped into my mind, so to be really fully present, I think that's a practice in itself. I mean, meditation is kind of like that's what meditation really is. The practice of meditation is really fully being in that moment. So being in that moment with someone with their undivided attention, I would say, is the first ingredient. I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, 100%, especially because just with that, like just if you set out in your day with the intention to be more fully present or more available for that level of connection, already like magic is happening for you. That's so pivotal. Like if you slow down and are present enough in the grocery store with someone who's really angry, being in that moment is what really allows you to realize like, hey man, that guy's got like a screaming 2-year-old at his feet. And like, you can really like take in and respond and not react. And I think you can't do that when you're in 20 different directions, which happens hella easy in our world with a cell phone that pumps us full of information, with music playing and the overstimulation. Like, I don't personally believe humans are designed to operate with that much going on. So to slow down, be present in and of like that practice in and of itself is like life-changing and ceremonial grade is what I want to say. It's like high level.
Totally. And not just that, but like when you're present with just like with other people and yourself, it's challenging because then, you're actually present with like what you're feeling and what's coming up for you too. So like, I think that's a really uncomfortable place for a lot of people to be. And I think this is a piece that like, like that saying is like, you can only meet someone as far as they've met themselves, so it's like, there might be people out there that like just can't hold deep space because they're not willing to go in and do the depth of work that they need to do in order to like be fully present with themselves. But I think it's something that we can all strive to. Is like, like there are different levels of like your ability to hold space. And the more that you can like hold space and have undivided attention for yourself and others, then you'll have that depth and that like connection there to do that in everything that you do. Right. I don't know about you, but like I have certain relationships in my life where I'll call them and I'll kind of like unconsciously maybe like seeking for them to hold space for me in some way. And it's kind of like, you kind of get on the call and you'll like be like, oh, like, I don't know, like having a rough day. And it'll be like, oh, like, that's nice. And you're like, oh, it makes you so angry. You're not even listening, like, it's just like, but like, it's like, that's a lot of us go through our day like that. And a lot of us, like, that's a coping mechanism in itself too, right?
Yeah. That honestly makes me think about the boundary piece, which I think would probably be another really pivotal part in holding space, or I know is a pivotal part in holding space. Totally. I know that one's important. And not just, I don't just mean like, oh, boundaries, I don't want to hold space with you. I'm talking about like good communication around your capacities and your willingness to hold space, and like an honest look at that as well. And I think it's super important as people who are either seeking someone to hold space for us or the space holder, we need to say like, hey, I need you to listen to me right now, and like put our needs out on the table so that person has the opportunity to step up and hold space for us in that capacity. And, like kind of put that holding space hat on and like really step into that role. But boundaries look like so many different things when it comes to holding space. It means being aware of yourself enough to tell when something comes up in that space, what is yours and what is not. And I think that again speaks to what you were saying about people can only meet you as far as they have met themselves. And if you are not aware and can't hold space for certain experiences or emotions or parts of yourself, whether that's rage or anger, and you haven't met that in you, it can be really challenging to stay engaged and in integrity while holding space for people who are going and processing those types of experiences or emotions. So that, for me, if being present is like number one, number two is being really clear and aware of what is yours, what is not, and not shaming. It's not like, oh, that's not mine, I don't want it. But the energy behind it is like, no, I will hold this safe container for you to do yours, and I will keep whatever is mine out of your container and maintain the level of integrity of the space you're holding.
Totally. And that almost makes me think of like, I think our generation, our parents were like kind of, oh, you're going to go cry, then go to your room and be by yourself and cry, and then it's like sometimes we can have people that are like have kind of wounding from this, and that like they don't allow themselves to fully emotionally process things. We're very emotionally illiterate. And I think you can see that in the like rising trend in this generation of like really like diving into emotions and gentle parenting and all of these new emerging techniques to help us, counteract this wound. But like, yeah, like emotionally speaking, you might have people that just like get really uncomfortable with the fact that, yeah, like you're angry or you're upset, and they can't be present because they were never given permission to do that as well too. So it's like, yeah, what is yours and what is not yours, and what's really coming up. And I think that's also part of the magic of holding space, is like it creates this container. It's like not just the person who's having the space held for them is transforming, but the person holding space is also transforming, and both people are learning and evolving together, which is super cool.
Yeah, that is for sure what I would say is like, that's the magic of it. Because I've had a lot of like, I've held space for people, and then my friends will find out that that's what I was doing on the weekend or something, and be like, well, why would you do that? Like, did you get paid? Did you get like, what is in it for you? And it's like, oh no, it is an honor. Like if you are ever asked intentionally to rise into that role and hold space for someone, or if someone has sought you out unconsciously and unbeknownst to them and trusts you enough to sink deep into that type of expression, and you hold space for them, like that is an honor. It makes me think of, bless the moms out there, first of all, but it makes me think of how your kid can go to school all day and be just like well-behaved, sit in the chair, be quiet, do what they're told, and then they come home and they unleash chaos. It comes back down to that trust thing. They trust that you're not going to make them sit in the corner, blah, 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 and punish them for the expression of their emotions. And there's that trust piece in there, which is a cornerstone of holding space. And it's so healing, because I think that's the wound. When you trust someone to hold space and they don't, it is earth shattering, especially as young kids, or when we're going through something that is like really monumental for us and we're having big feelings. We have a whole bunch of societal norms that are skewing our responses, telling us what's okay, even if it's subconsciously put on us by our parents, usually is more often than not, or society at large, not even the parents. But having that trust, be honored, and have someone see you in that, it is healing for both sides, because now you're like, wow, I get to rewrite this story and show up for that person in a way that supports their expression. And I can see them without judgment, without attack, without criticism, without trying to fix or solve their problem. I have the privilege to sit here and allow them to be and express. And that is an honor. I truly view it as an honor when you're holding space for someone and they can unravel like that. And then to have that done for you is like nothing short of profound. The act of being seen, of having someone hold space for you and not try and fix your shit, not try and change you, not try to shun or shame you into a role or into a different response or into an ingrained behavior, and they just see you and witness you, that undoes and reprograms some really profound things in your heart, in your head, in your being. That is some of the craziest magic, capital M, magic I've ever seen.
Totally, yeah. And the trust, like you were saying, is just like, I do feel like that is like, it is, the trust is like not just in like the fact that you're trusting the person to hold space, but it's like you're being trusted that like as a human being, you trust that like the person you're holding space for is able to evolve. It's like you're trusting that like, oh, like you've got this. It's like this is a natural process of being a human, is evolving and learning new lessons. And you'll learn about us. It's like we love to tie in the gene keys. And so it's like kind of stepping out of that shadow of judgment, like you said, and stepping into like that gift of integrity. And that is like, the integrity is the fact that like, oh, like life has a way of like figuring itself out naturally. So it's like, just because somebody's doing something, you're like, well, I already learned that lesson. And you're like trying to like force them to figure it out the way that you figured it out. Instead, you're like, no, like I see you're going through something. I'm going to allow you to witness this, and I'm going to watch you blossom and change and shift in your own time to get that lesson in exactly the way that you need it. And it doesn't need to be forced. It's trusted. We're patient, which I think is another super important quality with holding space as well. The trust is such a field of energy that you're entering into. It's not just like on one side. It's a trust in life. It's a trust in human evolution, right?
Yeah, that's such a good point. It's like the whole container is of trust. You're stepping into that whole frequency. Like it's not just, it's a whole vibe. It's a whole vibration.
It's cool.
We've touched on it like a few times, and I think it comes kind of down into like the sacredness or the confidentiality, the not gossiping, and the level of integrity that I think is really important and is like so important. I would call it a responsibility of someone who's holding space, is to respect the sacredness of what you are partaking in. So in that situation and with this kind of characteristics, it's really easy to understand that in the context of a therapist to a person seeking therapy. It makes a lot of sense. You're like, okay, the therapist is not going to go and tell the world, my dog died when I was 6 and I had a horrible reaction. I've never let it go, blah, 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 which is a totally reasonable response. But the therapist is not going to run around and tell everybody that. There's confidentiality. There is a respect of integrity and confidentiality and sacredness to that container. I think where it's harder to apply and embody those traits, the integrity, the confidentiality, is when we look at these situations in our life, like friend to friend or sister to brother, or those more mundane moments where someone maybe didn't establish the need to have space held for them and is just dumping on you without consent or without awareness or without intention. And then we become overwhelmed, or our boundaries aren't clear and we've taken too much on, and now it's thrown our whole system out of alignment and out of balance, and we have to go vent to someone else. And then all of a sudden we're gossiping about how this person said this to me here, and you're not in that intentional space holding capacity. And the confidentiality or the sacredness or the integrity of character that's required to show up in that way is now skewed.
Yeah, that's an interesting way. Actually, I was like, you were talking, I was like, that's funny. It's almost like a virus. It's like you're just kind of passing it along because you're not fully processing anything. And it's like just unconscious. It's like the product of unconscious space holding. Yeah, it's like unconscious space holding. You didn't like, the container wasn't safe enough for the two of you to fully like come to any kind of like safe, like to have that intense safety, like you're talking about, that confidentiality. And if that was there to begin with, then you wouldn't need to go to somebody else to process it. Or if you did, it would be like from the place of like, it's about you only, your own needs, not necessarily about the other person, really, right? Yeah.
We've talked about that so much, actually, in like our own friendship, of trying to figure out like, what's the line of gossiping. And I think it's important because if you are in a spiritual or on a spiritual journey, it's like holding space. We can get into some of these stories. Holding space brings up so much of your own shit. Like, it's not like you're sitting there and having someone go off about something in front of you, and like, it's not like that doesn't trigger the 20 different ways you've felt the same way in your life, and how easy it would be for you to jump on that bandwagon and be like, screw that person, and this is not fair, and viva the revolution. Like, we're human, you're human when you're holding space too. But I guess that ties back into that boundary and that level of self-awareness, which both feeds into that integrity piece, which I think I'm just word bombing integrity right now. But that's what it is. It's the type of character you have when people aren't looking. When you're holding space and you walk away and you were way overwhelmed and activated and things were working and moving in you, do you go to a close friend like I would to Alana, and I do all the time, and say, hey man, I got all this whole bag of stuff just got tickled open, and now I need to talk to you about my bag of stuff? That's not gossiping. That's a clear, like, hey, I need your support. And I have the intellectual and emotional awareness to say, hey, help, hold space for me. And then at the end, thank you for holding space for me. And it's like that awareness to set that intention with your friends and say, hey, hold space for me, in those mundane moments, I think is one of the most pivotal ways that we can set ourselves up for success, to not break confidentiality, to have clear boundaries of expectations, to be in integrity in those mundane moments when the boundaries aren't as clear.
Totally. Yeah. I think it's funny. Like, I feel like you're probably one of the few unique relationships, I think, because we have held so much space together, where like, it's been really clear to me that like examples of this, and I'll just share one, like, I think for example, like when Melanie and I were holding space together, for a plant medicine retreat, I just remember like, as people holding space, our stuff comes up too, and you want to try and process it. I remember like at one point somebody was giving Melanie some accolades about something, and I was like kind of like jealous about like the fact that, like she was getting praised. And so it's like, instead of being like, oh, like, well, Melanie's not that great, and like going and gossiping about it, I like went up to her and I was like, oh, like, it's so interesting, like I feel safe with you to be like, oh, like, like my little inner child, like I feel very like tender, and like I feel like left out, and I don't feel enough. And so like I was able to come to you with that, and you're like, yeah, like I totally get that. That's just like such a human feeling that can get triggered in each and every one of us, really, right? So it's like, yeah, it's like I wasn't like gossiping that like, oh, this person gave you accolades and didn't give me accolades. It was like, no, like I like was just I felt safe to be vulnerable, be like, this is what this is touching within me, and just saying it out loud and having somebody be like, yeah, man, like I get that. I see that.
Well, it happened to me in the same retreat.
Yeah, like two different moments, yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's a gift. That's the gift of that level of honesty. That's the gift of that level of showing up and like being brave, because that's what that is. You're being so brave and you're risking me not receiving you well. And that's what it is. It's a risk. It's like a risk for connection, a bid for connection. And you have to risk having that person not receive you well. And the reason I could sit there so confidently being like, oh, the universe is playing games with us, because maybe like 4 hours earlier, I had the exact same very human response of like, damn, Alana's really good at that. Wish I was better at that. And you have a choice. Like you have a choice in that moment. You hold space for yourself and say, I see these feelings that are coming up. That's not me. I don't wish Alana wasn't good at that so that I was good at it. I don't, that's not maybe real. It's just the feelings that are coming up for me and that are being tickled and triggered into life within me. And then when you have the awareness or the tools to show up in a relationship with someone and say, hey, this came up, and then you can collectively like laugh. I think we laughed hard about that one, because it was like, oh man. And then we can truly sit there. And for me, I'm just like, yeah, I get to so celebrate the shit out of you with you. And we can like, and it's just healing. It like brings you together more than anything, because now it's not like, oh, I'm jealous of you. It's like, yeah, get it, girl. I see you. Get it.
Like, totally. Yeah. These kind of like tender parts that like nobody wants to be like seen as jealous. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants to be seen as like, fill in the blank of so many different shadows that we have. And it's like, but like, hey, we're freaking humans, and we do, like, so it's like,
yeah, and we're not our feelings.
Be there. Yeah, exactly. They're not rational, like most of the time, so yeah.
Oh yeah. No, that's such a good point. Oh, man, I feel like we've covered so many things that you're going to want to like hang on to when you're holding space. Just these are things like, for me, are traits I like to embody or try to embody. And it's so important to understand and give yourself grace that like I miss the mark and I fall short on so many of these things so often. There's times where I don't have that level of awareness cultivated within myself, and I'm in deep reaction, and I'm not aware especially in those day-to-day moments where you have an opportunity to step in and put on your space holder hat and handle a situation with compassion and intention. It's so hard when that like blindsides you in a grocery store. That's a practice. That's like a walking everyday meditation of how you're choosing to see the world and other people, in particular, other people, with compassion first, with the benefit of the doubt first. And I think that's probably not the last, I'm sure there's like honestly a list so long, but that compassion piece, having compassion when you're holding space.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's, I think that's true. It's like almost like trying to come from that first always, to set up that space. Cause it's like a lens, right? Like it's kind of similar to trust. It's like a field of vibration. It's just like, yeah, like we're all humans and like nobody's better than anybody else. Some people have different lessons figured out more so than others. And so like when you come at that, it's like Earth is just one big school and we just kind of all get to show up and learn and grow together, right? And that brings about so much more compassion and togetherness and just a more fun, lighthearted environment.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think with something again that we talk about a lot in Alchemia is like that cosmic joke aspect. Like when you can give people compassion and grace, you can have this ability to show up into a very serious or heavy situation and collectively laugh at the fact that that's what we did. That's what in that example that we gave, that story you told, once you own, acknowledge, feel it, and then express it in a container with someone, you can laugh at the fact that like, oh, I was feeling jealous of someone. That it can become a lighthearted teaching as opposed to a deep, heavy, intense, pain-ridden thing to have to process, you know? And I think that's the power of,
we have to hide it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the power of bringing something to the light. And I think it's Brene Brown who talks about this. She does a lot of work with vulnerability and shame. I don't think there's anyone in the world who doesn't know about her, but if you don't, check her work out on vulnerability. Shame cannot grow or exist when you talk about it. That's the kryptonite of shame, you know? And how shamed and shunned are we as humans for our emotional responses? First of all, your emotional responses are not you. They're essentially just reactionary little tickle points in your history, and something becomes hysterical in the moment because it reminds of you something about when you were 6. Like, that doesn't mean that you're a jealous person when you experience jealous in that moment. So the power of just speaking it out loud allows that we're human, give each other grace. Let's have some compassion for the fact that existing as a human is complicated and convoluted. And more often than not, I end that with a giggle. Like at some point, I'm acknowledging the cosmic space that we all live in, and it's insane. This level, and what's more insane is your level of expectation on yourself to not experience very human experiences, and then to think that you're the only one that's ever felt jealous is like ridiculous. That's ridiculous. And it's hilarious at the end of the day.
Yeah, we like all value truth, and like that's what you're saying is like, you know, bringing the light to these things is bringing truth to things, and it's like, but yet there's still a part of us that's like always running, that's always trying to cope, that's never trying to change, is trying to stay the same, whether it's like your mind or your ego or the wounded parts, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, it's kind of like the paradox of being human is like we all want to evolve and learn and grow and become better, but like there's also a part of us that's like always continuously sabotaging ourselves and wanting to stay the same and not wanting to change.
But keep me comfortable.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I would love to be an entirely new person, but like only with comfort, please. Please don't make me feel any ick. Thanks. Just get on that, space dad.
Yes, and.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh. That's, I think, should be written into the values of Alchemia. Yes, and.
Yes, and. Totally. And then I think like also just, you know, we talk about like all the things, all the ways in which holding space is like good and all the like qualities we can try and like, you know, embody when we're doing it. I think sometimes when we're new to it, it's also important to see maybe the ways that we're not holding space the best, and maybe like just pointing out some of the common mistakes that kind of come up when holding space, and maybe some things that like you can try and become aware of, that we can all try and become more aware of, to avoid when we're, you know, practicing consciously holding space.
Totally. I'm always a sucker for a good pros and cons list, and we did just cover a bunch of things to embody. So a few things, I think my approach to this is like, what don't you like when people are holding space for you? Like, and this is really easy to do. If you look back in your little wound map that we all have, and if you're on a spiritual journey, I'm sure you have dipped your toes in all of the little childhood wounds that we tend to carry with us. If we look back and realize what occurred in that moment that caused us such pain that we've hung on to it for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, basically those things. So the first one that comes to mind is, how do I word it? Like, not even being acknowledged or witnessed. And then when I am seen, someone just tries to fix my shit. I'm just a problem to solve, right? And man, that can be damaging. First of all, feeling a hard feeling is not a problem. Second of all, there's no two people who have the same experience. There's no one answer to anything. And so often as individuals who are experiencing something hard, we just want to be witnessed and held space for, not fixed. So for me, the first cons or things to avoid on my list would be superimposing what you think that that person should do, trying to change what they are doing, trying to change their perspective too soon. Critiquing or judging or trying to solve a problem when you're not invited to, or when you're not at that stage in the process. So I think that can be really damaging, and it can be really unintentional because it comes from such a place of wanting to help more often than not. So it's important to know that that's not always helpful.
Yeah, and I think that comes to is a lot of us are we talked about earlier, is seeing somebody in a challenging emotional state can bring up a lot of our own insecurities of oh my God, I feel I need to make that, I feel uncomfortable seeing this person in this state. So if I can change their state and help them in some way, make it better for them, because maybe you think at some level better, maybe because you are better at in the earthly realm than them. But it's we think that, and then it's you're really you're kind of causing more damage than not, and it's there's a time if I'm Melanie, what would you do? I need some perspective. Give me an example of what you would do. That's different. But when you're in the depth of the hardest and toughest emotion, and somebody comes in and basically says, oh, you need to do this. This is what you need to do. And then it's we can be really, really fragile in that state. And it can also take away your power to figure it out for yourself and really figure out what is it that I actually need, which usually comes after a little bit near the end of emotional processing, which the first need is just being seen and heard and held and acknowledged as that almost little inner child that just needs a hug, and needs support.
Totally. You actually just touched on so many big points. This is, again, a moment where I'm this could be 30 podcasts.
Totally.
Man. It's so true, though. Holding space, specifically the point where it's you're looking to solve these problems to make yourself comfortable, not to be of service to that person. And just because this is subconscious does not mean that the consequences of it are not insidious. And what I mean by that is, if you're holding space for that person and they're experiencing a depth of sadness that hits something in your core, in your very being, that terrifies you, and that's your genuine response. Maybe you are genuinely terrified. Your response of being terrified is not an issue, but to try to make this person, by solving their problems, by helping, to try and make this person express or be or do anything other than what is true for them in that moment, in the capacity of holding space and having someone hold space for you, is selfish. You're doing that. You're not trying to help them in that moment. You're trying to change this situation so you don't have to feel that heavy, dark feeling, or so you don't have to feel uncomfortable. And I think it's important to name that, because yes, there's nuances here. Yes, sometimes you want to help. Yes, sometimes there might be a sprinkle of good intention in there. But a lot of the time that comes down to, you don't want to feel the uncomfortable feeling that's being invoked in you by witnessing somebody else's level of pain or suffering. And that is a selfish thing to do. And then on top of that, you double down, like you said, by disempowering them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You take away their learning curve.
Yeah, the level of self-awareness that you have to have in order to be actually aware and honest with yourself that you're doing this is, I realize is a challenging one to expect from most people. But ideally, that is the level of self-awareness and honesty that you really need to have in order to hold really profound, deep space for someone. I wholeheartedly believe you completely and deeply trust their process, and not try and interfere in any way other than maybe just to witness and to be a kind ear and to like you said, not judge. I think is also such a big piece of that puzzle as well too, as someone's experience as good or bad, because it really depends on which way you're looking at it, whether something's good or bad. That's just somebody's lens that they're
and you don't know shit.
Yeah, exactly.
like in the
Well,
most
but actually
loving way
shameless.
possible. Yeah, like the arrogance to think that you know best for someone else is laughable. Again, like that's a cosmic joke level laughable. Like what, you're going to show up and solve that person's problems and it's going to be fine? Like, okay, that's cute. Like,
Totally.
it's not, it's just, it doesn't work that way, right? And it's missing the point of holding space. Like, it's not about, our emotional experiences, first of all, are not problems to be solved. Like, I will even to this day catch myself, like, big time, this is a wound I've had for many years, catch myself trying to fix the problem so I don't have to have the feeling. Yeah. You can solve the problem 7 different ways from Sunday in the mind. That's fine. You're still going to have to be sad about it, dude. You're still going to have to process the feelings. And there ain't nothing you can do. You can't logic your way out of that. Like, you can't
bypass,
circumvent the process. Like, man, I get really fiery about this. I realize these cons are going to bring it out of me.
Oh, totally. And it's something in the spiritual community and in the like psychological community. I think we see a lot is like we're trying to understand emotions and wounds from the space of the mind, and the mind, like, yeah, we can understand it, but you can't bypass the process of what you naturally have to go through within your emotions, within your body, within your physiology. Like that's primal. That's just the innate natural part of being a human being. And so many of us just say like, oh, I like that, like the spiritual bypassing is like, oh, like if I just tell myself it's going to be this, then it is this. If I tell myself I'm happy and positive, then that's what we'll see. Just put that out into the environment. And I'm like, yeah, it's just not quite that simple. There's a reason why that, manifestation process hasn't really been working for most people. I know there's so many people out there that do that for a living now, manifestation coaches and things. And I'm sure there are some out there that do good work, but yeah, for the most part is like, I see that kind of same old, like, just like, be positive, look positive, like think good things, positive affirmations. And I'm like, yeah, if you're actually shifting the reasons as to why you don't feel that way in the first place naturally, right?
Dude, it makes me want to put my head through a wall. Like,
I hear that.
I'm like, yeah, okay, great. It's great in theory, dude. You can have it all figured out. Now what?
It's damaging too, right? Like, it's like, how shitty is it if you're you're like having suicidal ideation, your life sucks, and you can't see any light at the end of the tunnel, and somebody comes and just like, just think positive, just think more positive. It's like, I'm sorry, but like, screw you. God. Screw you.
You know what? That's another con.
Yeah.
That's another con. Being dismissive, minimizing. Yeah. That's another way we judge and inflict our whatever we're bringing to the table onto somebody else to try again to make them change so that we're not uncomfortable.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's oof. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's all like a pivotal point. Again, I keep saying that, but a pivotal point of holding space is that level of self-awareness to know what is yours and what is not. And if you don't have that, truly don't step into a place where you're required to hold space until you can hold space for yourself, because you can do more. You're perpetuating wounds if you slip up too many times, Of course, there's learning curves. And if you're honest and you communicate with the people you're working with or connecting with, that can go a long way. But yeah, there's skills you need, awarenesses and practices that should come first before a new counseling coaching business on Instagram that loves and lights their way through it all.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. And and you also have to think, like, from some level, maybe these people haven't ever had anybody hold space for them at a profound capacity. So they've never been able to meet the depths of themselves where they actually are even aware of like the profoundness of this, or that they even have these places within themselves, because they're just totally stuck in old coping mechanisms that like keep them stuck there, and they can't see because they're like, in the middle of it. Right. So like, I can have compassion for that, but also it's like, totally. Yeah, like, let's be aware of this in our relationships and with people. And as we become more aware of this, we'll be like so much more likely to like hold space for ourselves and shift things within ourselves and be more accountable with ourselves as well. Right.
Yeah. It's that calling people forward piece, not calling people out.
Totally.
It's like, okay, see the intention. Where's that underlying work that's got to move on that deeper level for any of this to do anything?
Totally.
Because that's got to be there too.
Yeah.
All right. Other cons.
I think it's like kind of goes back to like not just the minimizing piece, but like like projection. It's kind of like, thinking that, like your own, that you totally get what they're going through. It's like, oh, I've been there. Like, I know what you're going through. I know, not just what's best for you, but like, I think sometimes we can kind of like just see what we want to see because what we've experienced, it's like, I think that creates like a closing around the container and it doesn't really allow it to expand and to be exactly what it is. You might have some empathy and that's beautiful to be able to like kind of understand where that person's at, but also being open that like this person is a completely different human and has their own completely unique experience and views. And so to like leave space for that container to blossom and grow into whatever it needs to be of whatever they need to experience and process in that moment. Yeah. And I think like also just like, sometimes that can lead to like also like, you're even just that impatience piece. Projection is like you're impatient with this person because like, oh my God, maybe you're impatient with yourself. Is like, how can you're seeing somebody who has really low self-worth and you're like, it's uncomfortable for you. So you don't want to see it. So then you don't really want to be there to help them process it. And so again, always comes back to that, like, boundaries, really knowing what's yours and what's other people's as well.
Yeah. Honestly, heading into this podcast, I didn't realize how much we would be talking about, like, this is repainting the landscape of holding space for me, because so much of it really comes back to self-awareness. You can't navigate if you can't see. If you aren't aware, you can't mitigate, plan for, learn around, cultivate, work through. Like, you have to, that level of self-awareness. At the beginning of this podcast, I didn't even realize how much we would be referencing back to it and how pivotal it is to know thyself, And I think that's a hard thing that gets thrown around in this community.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And it's something that like, you can't force it in other people too. Like I've talked to people before and it's like, you can kind of maybe like, and maybe I'm projecting a little bit in that moment too, but you can kind of see like, okay, like there's something there, but then they just kind of like deny it, like that denial of like the truth. It takes a certain level of like courage and bravery to like lean into that edge and be like, and like it really hurts the ego to be like, oh, like I might be a human who's jealous. And I'm like, when the ego would initially be like, I'm not jealous, and then make it about something else or whatever. I might be a person who is experiencing fear or like, because I'm trying to control everything. It's like, no, I'm not doing that. It's like the level at which we like deny what we're going through is like, you have to be open to the experience that within yourself, that you also are human and you also are allowed to experience the wide array of amazing human flavors and emotions that come with it. And we're not exempt to these really, right? It's like what you're experiencing, I can guarantee multiple in the collective are also experiencing at some level these feelings, these emotions, because we're one at some level. And that's, a concept that's not everybody understands. But I think, we need to be like aware that like we're not separate from the condition of humanity. And so then we can start to be honest and truthful and trust that like, oh, okay, the only way to like actually shift this is to be completely honest and truthful with like my experience in this moment. And that's scary if you've been running from that your whole life, or if you were taught to run from that your whole life because your parents did that. Because like people have been through some crazy shit and I get why they don't want to feel it. Like I get it wholeheartedly.
Oh, it's hard. Mm-hmm. And that's something too that rubs me the wrong way. Like we can have this conversation all day long. And I think my biggest not takeaway, but something I would really want to drive home is like, just because we talk about this so calm and cool and collected does not mean that this is easy. This is super, super, super hard. These skills I mess up on all of the time. This is the classroom of connection. This is the classroom of learning to be in right relationship. This is what it means to learn how to hold space. And while you are learning all of these things, you are holding space for yourself.
Totally.
You're holding space for you to learn the skills in order to be able to show up for other people in a more conducive way or with more integrity. And I think that is the really cool, like Mandela? Yeah. Mandela? Butterfly effect?
Mandala, yeah.
Mandela.
Yeah, it's like a fractal of the same thing over and over again, repeating itself.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
again and again and again, deeper and deeper, and then the micro to the macro. Like you take these small little lessons that you've learned how to handle within yourself, and you apply it to your best friend, and you apply it to your mom, and you apply it to your community, your school, your whatever. And it is a learning curve, and it is not easy. This is hard. Like, and I think that's why it's hella tempting to spiritual bypass our way through this shit. Like, sign me up for love and light, as opposed to deeply cultivating why I feel like I'm never enough. No one's implying that that's a fun, easy path to travel. It's not. I don't like it, but I do it.
But it's worth it. It feels itself forward in the future.
Man, when you do get that connection, or when you are held, gosh, it could make me cry right now with how healing that is. Like when you're seen just in all of your humanness, and it's okay to be human, that is profound and life-changing and tear-worthy.
100%.
I had one more con and I'm forgetting what it was. Oh, so I think in a way, almost like the opposite in a sense of what we're saying, where you kind of project and kind of like close down the doors, batten down the hatchets, and like just try and make the situation go away so you don't have to go in there. I think another con or slip up or things that we can kind of trap we can fall into when we're holding space is, instead of saying, oh no, not me, fix your problem, you're a problem, I'm going to solve it, I'm going to get away from it, we take it all on. And that's another level of boundaries and lacking boundaries. Whether you talk about this on the different realms, we're talking in your mental world, your emotional world, your spiritual world, energetics, when you take it all on and now that person's experience becomes yours, your body suffers. For me, it's my body. I know for you, you struggle with your body in that regard when you take on other people's stuff as well. You become mentally drained. You can become, when you are holding space for someone and it's dark or heavy or big, and you let all of that penetrate your field and you take on that energetic burden, you will exhaust yourself to the point of manifesting and holding a mass amount of dis-ease in your physical body. And I can't even name the number of people who are in this kind of space holding care provider, facilitator role who die of diseases like cancer, breast cancer, heart cancer, stomach issues. This stuff manifests physically when you take it on and hold it, especially when it's not yours. Like you already have enough of your own stuff in your body to work through. And if you slip up on those boundaries and you take on other people's stuff when you're trying to hold space for them, that is just as detrimental as attacking and solving and fixing other people. It's wounding you on an energetic internal level hugely.
Well, yeah, you can't it's also, you're like robbing the person of actually doing it themselves. But it's kind of an unconscious pattern that a lot of us do, especially I think those with that archetype of the wounded healer, is like, we think that like in some way we're enacting the healing. And we kind of grab onto it and like, we kind of like grab onto the energy and hold onto it and hold it in our bodies and don't let it flow through us, or don't let them fully process it. There's quite like I think you're right. Like there's like a dance kind of going on kind of in the invisible realms of kind of a lot of subconscious things that kind of come up when we're holding space. And so, it is really important that you have practices, I think, to disconnect and to clear yourself and to, and I think also like when you have that trust that like this person's going to get there on their own and you're not trying to like lift them up or like energetically get them there sooner, or like you said, fix it for them in some way, then like you're also able to, create that boundary and keep it safe. But if somebody's coming to you as a therapy practitioner, they're paying you. There's a bit of this it's like, oh, I'm paying you to do this for me. But in reality, it's like being clear. It's like, no, like I'm creating the container. You're doing the shifting. It's like having that clear idea in your mind of like what's actually happening, right? So we can't move other people's stuff.
That brings up that pillar. No, and that brings up in Alchemia, our pillar of empowerment. We're here to empower them to shift and move their stuff. We are not here to do the work for them. We're not here to take it on ourselves. We're here to hold the most solid container for you to step into that badass alchemia, as you possibly can. And I think everyone does, and it's usually subconscious, like you said, such a disservice to the people that we are trying to help when we take it on for them and try to manage or mitigate. That is disempowering them, and you are essentially on an energetic level telling them that you don't think they're strong enough to do it on their own. Yeah. You're essentially saying, you can't handle this. Clearly, your emotional response is too unruly. You're not strong enough. You're not capable enough. You can't figure this out. Let me save you. And I think that is a huge disservice, not only to ourselves, but for sure the people that we're in the position to be holding space for. How sad it is to tell someone that they can't do something on their own, even if it comes from a good place.
It's like guru, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
The guru mentality.
We're talking some real big collective rudes there.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Like somebody outside of you knows better than you, and that's not true. And I think it is. It's big. It's a big part of Alchemia is like, we're here to empower you to do this yourself. Like this is, and it's funny because it's like, you create that dependency when you like have that relationship with the practitioner. It's like, oh, I have to go to them because I feel this. It's like, but then you're constantly dealing with the same thing over and over again. It's like, I think there's like, even like, you can pay people like thousands and thousands of dollars to like align your chakras and align your energy bodies and stuff like that. And it's just like, but if you don't know how you got there to begin with, and you didn't actually like earn that state because you actually fully like embodied and got those lessons, then you're just going to end up exactly in the same space again in a couple months. And then you're going to have to fork out thousands and thousands of dollars to do it again. And like you said, it's not good for the practitioner. Like it's like that's, it's not
Band-Aids.
Being of service. It's not really being of service to the collective in any way. And I feel like we're all being called at like an individual level to like really show up and learn things for ourselves. As like, you even see it in this like emergence of like homesteading, of people like creating little micro, like, ecosystems on their property, like take care of themselves and take care of their families. And you're just seeing this resurgence of like, the individual first. As we take care of the individual, it naturally takes care of the collective. It naturally takes care of the environment when we are in alignment that way, right?
Yeah, to me, it feels like the antidote for victimhood, personal responsibility, accountability, and then empowerment. Like, you can't change or shift stuff if you are pretending it's not yours, or if you're pretending it's not a problem. And seeking someone else to do that for you is not what holding space is. If you go to someone and say, hey, fix my stuff for me, you're telling yourself that you can't figure it out. You can't work through it. You don't have the power, the capacity. And you know what? That's something to look at. That's something to unpack. And I think for me, in like on a personal note, the way I view holding space is I will go down into that dark hole with you. Like, I'll sit there with you and I will hold your hand and I will cheer you on while you do whatever you got to do. And when you're ready to move, I'll walk with you and I'll take that next step with you. That's all I'm doing. I'm walking with you. Mm-hmm. And I think that's how I've always viewed holding space, is I will journey this path with you. I'm going to butcher it, and I believe it was Helen Keller, but she says it's better to walk with a friend in the dark than alone in the light. And I've had some profound experiences where plant medicine has showed up for me and has been that friend for me in the dark, where you have shown up for me and been that friend for me in the dark. And what that did, it's going to make me cry. What that did was crack me open so much that if I have the capacity to just sit there with you, I will never leave you alone in the dark there. That is like, I'm not going to get you out of it, but I'll sit with you while you're there. Mm-hmm. I'll move with you to the next step while you're there. That's what the beauty of holding space is to me. It's that it's hard enough, man. Everything is hard enough. We don't need to make it harder. Let's do it together. It's a team thing. I'll sit with you. I'll move with you. I won't do it for you because I believe in you.
Yeah, lean on me when you don't have the strength and the patience, and I'll like let you know that like I'm still here and like I'm still seeing you and I'm still loving you. And it's totally super transformative and like what life's all about, really. I think at the end of the day, because we don't exist in a vacuum.
Connection.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We don't exist in a vacuum, and it's so like lovely to think like, yeah, like I have no problems, but yeah, when you really get out there and go into a relationship is like, you know, that's when it all comes up, and that's where like all our wounds come from. And to help sit with someone and like help them remember like the truth of their beingness is that they're greater than the human experiences they're having, and that like it's okay to go through this, and that this is the point, and trusting that whatever you're working through, whatever's coming up for you is exactly what you're meant to be going through right now. This is the sticky place. This is the evolution spot. If you look at nature, nothing in nature is like ever evolved because it was easy. Like it's not like just like an easy, like a super easy step forward. It's like, you know, like there's some grit there. Like you gotta like struggle a little to like be like, yeah, this is hard. And then comes the good times, and then comes the shifts, and then comes the adaptation and all that, really, right? And I think that's something that a lot of us are chasing in the spiritual world as well, is like that bypassing piece. Is just like they want it to just be like, it's just, why isn't it easy? Why isn't it easy? And I'm like, who said it was going to be easy? Who said so?
And what good comes from easy?
Yeah.
What good comes from easy? You know, it's just easy. That's it. That's the only value in easy. There's no real value there. And I think on the homesteading note, that is a lesson that growing a tomato will teach you. That tomato tastes better when you dig that hole. That tomato tastes better when you water it daily, when you pick it, and when you eat it. That tomato tastes better because it was not easy. There was effort put in. There was value instilled throughout every step of the way. Yeah. I feel like I homestead. So for people who don't know, we talk about gardening and life parables often because I homestead. It's not just, I mean, we also do just like tomatoes, but...
Yeah, no, it's a really good metaphor though, I think, for this and for life in general. It's yeah, because I mean, like ideally I'm like, cool, homesteading's awesome, but I'm like that, and I like really like look at you and I look at the like amount of grit that goes into it. I'm like, wow, yeah, like that's not easy, but yeah, like then you bear the fruit and it's like, oh yeah, like this is amazing. But like that, not saying that homesteading is everybody's path, but like that's kind of like you know, what I mean is like, you know, if it's before you and it's something that like you like maybe has a little bit of grit to it and like you need to lean into, is like that's where you're going to find that like at the end, going through that toughness is going to like bear that fruit, and you're going to enjoy it, and you're going to shift this, and you're going to evolve. And yeah, I think so many of us just want things to be easy, and like we want, you know, the government to like tell us what to do, where to be, how to live, or
a guru,
or like fit into society, or fit into like, yeah, or our school systems. You know, we're just so pigeonholed into like fitting into the norms that we should be fitting into, because that's what's easy. Because stepping outside of the norms is hard. It's challenging. It makes you question yourself and face the parts of you that aren't in alignment with who you're becoming, or, you know, like what's actually of value, where do we actually want to spend our energy. It's a big one.
Gene key 38, from struggle to perseverance to honor. So that's my life work, gene key. But that is such the shift between the shadow of struggle to the shift from the shadow of struggle to the gift of perseverance speaks volumes to the only way out is through. And that's really something that I see within my work holding space, but also my own journey. And when people are holding space for me, the only way out is to move through, to walk the path, to take the next step, to do the next hard thing, to do the thing right in front of you. And you have a choice to view that as a struggle, or you have a choice to view it as an opportunity to exercise your perseverance muscle. And when you can take on that mantle of perseverance and you take that next step and you make that next move, there is such a gift that comes, and it's easily shown in homesteading because it's so physical, right? It's so right in front of you. But you can apply this to anything you work hard for. Personal development, the gym. I think the gym is where a lot of people in our modern culture flex the muscle of perseverance and of struggle. You know, we are forged people. Steel sharpens steel. Character development, integrity, who we are forged. And to be forged is not a life of ease. Dean Graciosi says you tune your mess into your message. And that's real. You can help people along a path you've walked only when you've walked the path. Like, there's yeah, there's weight in that. And beauty, because at some point you learn how to giggle while you persevere.
You have to at some point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so in summary of our pros and cons, things that we want to embody, would they be like self-awareness, compassion, intention?
Yeah.
What are some others? We covered
Patience,
a lot.
sacredness.
There's so much in there.
Yeah.
Patience. Yeah, sacredness, responsibility, respect.
Attention.
Cons. Yeah. I feel like you can flip almost any of the pros into a con. Like, don't be distracted. Yeah. Don't project. Don't be flippant. If you can't hold space at that moment, be honest, because it's better to say you can't than to do it and hurt someone unintentionally.
Yeah. Don't be judgmental.
Yeah. Solving people's problems without being asked.
Yeah.
Don't take it on. That's a big one that I think a lot of, like you said, the wounded healer archetype. Don't
minimize. Also, don't overreact to. I think that's another one maybe we didn't mention, but it's kind of the opposite of minimizing, but it's kind of projecting your own experience onto it.
Don't blow it up.
Making it bigger than it is.
When someone's like, wow, you're super messed up, dude.
Or it's like, have you ever called a friend too?
I mean,
sorry, I'm getting off topic, but have you ever called a friend before and you're telling them a story and then they get all up in arms. You're like, hey, this person did this to me. They're like, oh my God, how dare you? You should do this and you should do this. And by the time you get off the call, you're like, you weren't even angry, but you're like, yeah, I'm really, really angry now. I don't even know why. And it's because that person, you kind of they projected their experience of obviously something they went through in the past. And now you've taken on their anger and you're like, oh, and then you go take it out on that person maybe you're having issue with, whether it's your partner or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? It's so funny.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That totally happens. When your friend just goes too hard on the hype train and you're toilet paper in someone's house.
You think you're just being supportive and you're really making their experience something that it isn't.
Totally. You just hijacked it. You've hijacked it. It's all about you. That's a con. That's a good one, though. Don't hijack the experience. It's not about you. It's not about you.
Yeah. Yeah. So
do you have an experience, because I think as Alchemia, we're all about authenticity. And I think this podcast shows that we are student to student. We are not teacher to student and we are not gurus. So in the spirit of authenticity, I would love to hear a story from you of a time you held space and it was you fell short of the integrity level of space holder that you would like to embody. Do you have any oops, I shouldn't have done that moments?
Oh, yeah. I feel like I still have them frequently. And I feel for me, it's more in my marriage with my husband. We both work from home now and we're both in the same space a lot. And so it's we're really bad at prefacing that initial can you hold space for me? Or hey, I want your attention. I find either me with him or him with me is we can get excited about something and then all of a sudden come in and be I've literally had full on conversations with him where I didn't listen to a single word he said. And at some point down the line, it's that was important to you. And then he feels like I didn't hear him or that I don't listen to him. And I'm that's the last way I want my partner to feel is that I don't hear them. I don't listen to them. But it's distracted piece. And it's just so again, if you do work from home with somebody, with your partner, you both work from home, even when you don't, just really making an effort to pause and be or you said, be honest, hey, I'm sorry, I'm just finishing this right now. Give me 10 minutes and I can come, or remind me later and we'll talk about this, that kind of thing. So we're getting better at that. But I would say that's where I've probably failed the most is probably with him. I feel with my friends, it's I'm, scheduling time and, I'm very, very much more conscious of setting my phone aside, but it's the people that the man that I'm seeing all day, every day. And we're coexisting, but also having to find time to connect in there is usually where I find the most struggle. Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, totally. Man, I have a doozy habit of giving people advice.
Yep.
Yeah, I especially because the other day, just a couple of my girlfriends and I got together, and I've known these girls for forever, since over 15 years, some of my closest friends. And I think what happens is I get excited, and I know that sounds silly, but I get really excited where I'm oh, I've done a practice that helped me with that. Or when I was doing that, like I have this like, oh, I'm going to relate to you and tell you what I did kind of thing. I think it comes with like doing a lot of spiritual self-help work for many years where I'm like, oh, this helped me when I was in that. And I feel like I can relate a lot to the person who was sharing at the time. And while I did listen and I asked clarifying questions and I was proud overall of how I held space in the moment, I could have definitely just sat in the moment a little bit more and allowed her to express her feelings more without trying to orientate it to a solution. Mm-hmm. And I even do that with myself. Like this is something that I perpetuate a lot. Far before I even get into relationship or holding space for other people, I do this in myself a lot. I don't give myself maybe as much time as I should to be in the feeling, which is why I'm so adamant that it's important, because I've seen this switch in myself when I have given myself permission to feel the feels and then pivot later on to what are we going to do about it. But it's definitely something I've worked and have been aware of and working with for many years. I've got a lot of earth placements, Capricorn and stuff. I'm very action oriented. Like, what are we doing about it? Like, what are we doing? Okay, we're sad, but what are we doing? And I found a lot of gifts in myself when I gave myself more permission to sink into the moment. So in that situation, I could have just sat with her a little bit more. And of course, like to some degree I did, but to the caliber I wanted to, I could have shown up a little bit more and just held space and listened. It's not always, now what do we do? Next steps.
Totally. And it's a sticky one too. Cause it's like, it's not like we're saying, like you said, like giving advice is never allowed. But yeah, like there's you're right. There's like an intuitive placement on like when to do that. And I feel like that's also something that I can totally relate to, like needing, that I'm still kind of working on, partially because I mean, people paid me in my practice as a naturopath to like come to me for advice. So like, it's just so easy for me to put that hat on and like start solving. But you're right. Like, it's like, totally. That's not most of the time in relationships. That's not really what we're looking for. And yeah, there's a time and place. And yeah, I love what you said about like giving time to fully feel the emotion, because that's exactly what it is. It's like, if you don't, you end up moving and reacting from that from that emotion, and then you're being moved from a place of misalignment, and then you're doing from a place of misalignment, and then you're perpetuating and constantly running from your truth, really, right? But yeah, once you like let that emotion fully ride its course,
and it comes back up later.
Yeah, exactly. Once you let it fully run its course, then there's like that clarity there, and like whatever you choose to do will come from that grounded, aligned place. And I think, yeah, that's such a key point, in when is the time for solutions and advice. Yeah, I think that's a really important one. Thanks for sharing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's been a thing for many years, but this is why this conversation, I think, is pivotal in the space, because these are skills you hone. This is not something you just know. And I think that's the whole point of this conversation, and why I like sharing our fumbles and our errors and being authentic with it, because this is exactly what it means to learn how to hold good space. And this is holding space for ourselves and each other to become better space holders. How many times do you think I just said hold space?
Oh gosh.
A lot. But that's the thing. It's like the Mandela effect. Like I said, like it's fractal, like again and again and again, you're learning the skills in life to show up in good relationship. And a part of a good relationship is being able to hold space for them and forgive each other when it doesn't go well.
Yeah. And yourself, you're constantly in evolution.
I've started to go back. I think I've done this to you recently, being like, hey, I didn't mean to get that conversation about problem solving so quickly. I should have listened to you a little bit more. And that ownership in that relationship, I think, goes a far way. Or I'll ask, hey, if I relate to you and I tell a story that relates to your story, does that make you feel like I'm not listening to you? Or do you feel like I'm trying to conceptualize what you're saying and make it make sense for myself? So having that kind of open dialogue has been a really big help for me in just establishing good relationship and saying, hey, I'm trying to show up well for you, and showing the people in your life or the people you're holding space for, I want to show up well for you. Help me figure out how to do that, because everyone is so different and so nuanced.
So true.
And I don't know how everybody needs to have space held for them.
That's
so like,
so true.
Tell me what makes you feel seen. Tell me. Yeah.
Yeah, because like, well, it's like, it's funny.
How can I listen to you better?
When you mentioned that story, like, and I remember you asking me that, and I like, it's funny because it's something that like I've contemplated with holding space, and I don't feel personally when somebody tells me their story that like it takes away from mine, because I'll just clarify if I feel there's a difference there. I feel like it adds to the experience, and I feel like yeah, like they're trying to understand and they're trying to connect in some way. So that's how I feel personally. But I also know other people like when I do that, or when I do that, yeah, like they don't feel that way. They feel like, oh well, you just made it about you, and it's like I'm really trying to like connect with them and like and understand deeper, right? So yeah, it's like you're right. It's good to like clarify and be honest and have good conversations about this with our people that are we're close with in our lives, so that we can be more effective when we're kind of treading these more vulnerable places with them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a process. I have to keep on trying to not swear, which is why I keep like stuttering, but I'm like, yeah, it's a dang process, man.
Sure is.
On this note though, and with authenticity in mind, I want to do like victory lap style. Tell me about something or a situation that someone held space for you, or you held space for someone, and you were really feeling in alignment and like wow, or proud of yourself for like utilizing a skill that we've talked about that you were struggling with before. But like, give me a victory lap. Like when has it worked out real good?
Yeah, no. I feel like there's a lot of examples where I felt good stuff, but the one that's kind of coming to mind the most right now, and maybe I'm stealing your story, is this one time you and I had an experience where we took some plant medicine. We had taken some cannabis, and or I take some cannabis.
You are stealing my story.
I am stealing your story, but you can expound upon your experience after if you want.
This is my victory lap. It's our victory lap. No,
yes,
get it.
It's a collective story for us. Yeah, and you had not been feeling very well at the time. You were having some stomach issues, and I don't know. I had taken some cannabis, and cannabis is like kind of how Melanie and I, just a little backstory, kind of initially connected, as we talked about like the use of cannabis in ceremony and as a ceremonial herb, as a plant spirit medicine. And it's something that most people use to disconnect. And cannabis, I find, as a plant spirit is very interesting because she tends to give people what they want. But I feel there's this surgence of like wanting to use her ceremonially, and not that she hasn't ever been used ceremonially by any means of imagination, but something that we talked about and connected over about wanting to do. And yeah, it was so funny because I took some cannabis, and yeah, it ended up like turning into this beautiful resonating session where I was able to really deeply connect with Melanie on and experience kind of what she was experiencing, and was able to like conceptualize it in a way and really feel with her through some things as she processed them. And yeah, it was almost psychic in some way. It was very, very cool. And then the situation kind of flipped, and she held space for me afterward, and it was very divine, very ceremonial, very beautiful. And at the end, it was just like I felt like both of us had. I won't speak for you, but I felt like me specifically, I tapped into a part of myself that like I didn't really like. I had been kind of maybe avoiding. Like it was like I think I had described it at the time as like there was like a pocket of shame and fear and anger that like I just was like really like I'm not going there, tied to a specific wound in my past that I've processed a lot, but I don't know about you, but like there's always seems to be more. And hey, part of me is like, that's okay. If I don't have to experience another traumatic event, then yeah, we can keep mining this one for more gems. I'm cool with that. But yeah, so I was able to kind of tap in and get some clarity around it. And it was so unexpected and so beautiful. So yeah, that would be my most recent, probably favorite example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a good one. Yeah, that was also my victory lap story, only because, well, I'll still say it. I'll still tell my story, but from the you holding space for me and like the power of having someone hold good space for you and what that can do, because a lot of my stomach issues are around my solar plexus chakra and taking on of other people's emotions, what's mine, what's not mine, and also changing how I move in the world in order to appease other people. So a lot of that people pleaser tendency, a lot of those kinds of wounds have been tied into some like physical stomach issues that I've had. And to work through some of those wounds would required and require still being seen and showing up fully in my expression and allowing someone to see me. And I would not be able to heal those wounds without having someone see them. And that is why this is a victory lap for me, because, and for you really, because you held such beautiful space that I can safely say there would be no better person for me to show my underbelly to. Like, this is why sayings like that exist, which I think is funny. Literally my underbelly to, like, all of my wounds, all of my tummy issues. Here's all of my like ooey gooey stuff that I have perceived as so detrimental, so wrong, so not allowed, so not okay in the space. And that I have spent years sculpting different egoic personalities to hide or filter or to perform or to not let be seen. And, the healing that those wounds required were to be seen, and you saw them and received them. But not only received them, you also like gave me some really genuine feedback that was so profoundly accurate that I had like a moment of freaking the fuck out because magic is real. And I have a lot of those moments. I have a lot of those moments all the time, and I'll never stop loving them because it's always like, oh, that childlike awe. In that situation, when you were witnessing me and holding space for me and stuff like that, I have never felt, especially in those areas of my life, that understood, that seen, that okay. And that understood really, like, and then seen and praised in some way for some of those things that I had shunned and shamed. This is a word tie for me. Shunned and shummed. We'll make a new word. SHUMED. Shummed. Shummed and shamed away. Anyway, yeah, it was really powerful. So that's definitely a victory lap story, because I would not have, those wounds required space being held for me to express them, for them to be healed. So they would still be there if you didn't hold such profound space. So thank you.
And thank you to you. Yeah, it was a really beautiful, profound experience for me on the receiving and on the holding space end. It was, yeah, like you said, it was just quite magical. And I always feel like I have a really deep and strong connection with you. And I feel like it was really like destined that we were to come together to like create Alchemia and to do this work. And it shows, I think, in just our chemistry and the way that we hold space within our own friendship as well.
Yeah. It makes me really excited to create with you, because it's like, oh, I trust that she's in alignment with her source. Like, your heart is in alignment with what you're here to be doing. And I think it's really exciting when we have that honest exposure to people, to have a true connection that you can just have that level of trust and then journey with them on the path of life, right? Holding space is just one big allegory to the human experience and how we can interact with each other in everyday life. And I think having that trust and showing up in that vulnerability and cultivating some of those pros and avoiding some of those cons is what helps us move through the experience, the journey, or the ceremony of life in right relationship with each other and collectively.
Totally. Yeah. No, definitely a totally different vision than what we would normally see in like a business relationship, or even I think some traditional friendships, but it's like, it's really working for us, and it's provided so much, yeah, like you said, magic with a capital M. I love that.
Yeah. Big magic, boy. Well, we're pushing, I think, almost an hour and a half. So I think that's probably good for our first podcast. I don't know how long we do these things for. This is a topic that we could just keep going on.
Totally. It's a big one. But let us know if there's anything that was interesting and we can expound upon in the future.
Thank you so much for watching the first ever episode of the Sacred Seat podcast. This has been a wild ride to get us here, so please bear with us as we learn and adapt and get accustomed to podcasting and creating content in this online universe. If you enjoyed this podcast or got any value, please hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments below what you would like to see from Alchemia or the Sacred Seat podcast as a whole. Our hearts are full, we love you all, and we'll see you all back here very shortly.